Cool. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Nonfiction Book Club, this month's edition. I think we're like getting rid of months. We're just meeting when we can meet. But
We
this
meet
is
at some interval.
yeah,
Time will pass. We will meet again. Who can say?
yep. But we're here. We're here now. Oh, sorry. My YouTube version of that started, and then I was like, "Huh, Nicole's really repeating herself," and then realized what was going on. Welcome to everyone who's joining us today. If this is your first time with Nonfiction Book Club, I'm Deboki. I sometimes booktube. I also like talk about science stuff. I write science for like podcasts and YouTube. And then also, I guess, do Nonfiction Book Club. This is like the main thing now. Like I'm increasingly getting to the point where this is my main thing on YouTube is remembering to read books for Nonfiction Book Club.
Yeah, sure. That is really truly the only thing that I do recreationally on YouTube. My name is Nicole Sweeney. This is the only thing I do on YouTube. In my my professional life is YouTube all the time.
Yeah.
So
I was gonna say you do a lot technically on
no,
YouTube.
I do a lot on YouTube. But I get paid to do that, and so when I'm not being paid, I seem to be doing less and less. That's it. That's who I am as a person. I don't know what else I'm supposed to say, but
Yeah. Well, today we're here to talk about Up to Speed, the groundbreaking science of women athletes by Christine Yu. So the book is about the science, like basically about exercise science, but really more like about how bad research is in exercise science, in particular related to women and kind of how and then in turn how that's like really played a big role in the fact that like we don't really know how to train women well. We don't know how to like do a lot of things well basically with women. And like one of the things that I'll just caveat this from the beginning, like the book, I think when it says women is usually talking about cis women, and it's like pretty clear at different parts. She says this up front in the introduction, about like when she's using other language, like people who menstruate, people who have breasts, like there are specific contexts where she generalizes her language a little bit more. So like there might be times where I feel like the terminology might shift around a little bit. So like if I ever mess that up, I don't mean that to be like exclusionary. I think it's just based on kind of the context of what we're talking about in the book. But yeah, I found this book super interesting. I'm super curious what you think of it, because like I feel like in general, like more and more, like I know that the science around a lot of women's health issues is just so limited, and this reminded me of that in a lot of different ways, like just the amount of ways that the book approaches it in terms of like nutrition, training, just like so many different things. I was like, yep, great.
yes.
This
Yes.
love to feel validated in the worst parts of my experience.
Yeah, a lot of this was horrifying. I have at some point I wrote in the margins what, and I cannot stress this enough, the fuck. I believe it was the bit about women cyclists having labiaplasties and that being like a regular whatever. I'm getting ahead of myself. The book itself, it's really interesting. The sub had the groundbreaking science of women athletes, because the book is actually mostly about the lack of science. Like
Yeah.
it is like the thing that this book is most about is the absence of science about women athletes and why that is a problem.
Yeah.
It touches on the places where there is stuff, and that's not Christine Yu's fault, right?
Well, like actually, like I think that's like one of the things that like I was impressed by is how much she's able to write out of a lack of science, and how she's like able to do that very well. Where like I felt like she did a pretty decent job of balancing like conveying information, even though like the point is that like this is information that is very indefinite.
Yes. Yes. This is information that we're still developing. This is information that's not entirely there.
Yeah.
And we're making do with making do with what exists. She did a really good job too of like contextualizing that when she was giving information of like, this is where the research currently is. But also the research is really inconclusive. This is based on, one study with a really small sample, like, whatever. I think
Mm-hmm.
I appreciated that. That's actually the one thing though that I think I appreciated that she did it. I think there are a few places where, because of that, I found myself a little bit tripping over it, where I'm like, you're making a
Mhm.
statement here, and I don't know. I don't like, because she didn't always do it, and I understand
Right.
why. There were a few places where I was like, okay, I don't 100% know if we can make this specific statement, because part of the point is the lack of research here. So,
Right.
but that's like a broad kind of overall um thing, but for the most part, I found this book really fascinating. I liked it a lot. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. And because I think like one of the core things that I took from this book, and I feel like this is something that I've seen coming up more, like part of the reason why I wanted to read this book is I had read like, so the author, the physiologist she like talks to a lot, I think it was physiologist, Stacy Sims, she has this book about nutrition. And I like was having this whole like frustrating like moment with like nutritionists like a few months ago. Like
Mm.
I was like basically like over the past year, like realized that like I had a hormone problem, like pretty common, like hypothyroidism is like pretty common, I think. But like I think like a lot of things in women's health, you like I only found out about it because I went to a reproductive endocrinologist after like multiple miscarriages. And like so it's a little bit annoying where it's like, oh, okay. So like it I just thought I was tired and like
Right.
it like, you know, it takes like a while to like get to a point where you're like, oh, this is like not normal. And like it came up because of a bunch of other tests I was doing that was not about that at all. Or like not focused on that. But like basically since then, like being sort of on this ongoing journey of like my relationship to like my body, and like that's also obviously connected to like miscarriages and everything with that, but like with fitness and like my nutrition and just like trying to like take better care of myself in a way where like I've done sports like for most of my life, and like it's been really hard for me in the past few years to kind of have to shift the way I approach sports like as my health has changed, where I can't like do the things that I like when I was in grad school. I did a lot of like heavy lifting. I did CrossFit. I did like a lot of intense things. And like over the pandemic, I was trying to get back into like kind of like lifting at home and stuff. And it just like wasn't hitting the same. So just like
Mm.
big, I'm sorry, I'm so far from the point, but this book just like I really enjoyed it because it just like made me think so much about my relationship to fitness and my body. And so yeah, like because of like I've been dealing with like that stuff. Like I talked to a nutritionist like a few months ago, and I came out of the conversation like super frustrated. Like I ended like I still got good advice, but it was also like very frustrating because her advice was basically just like maybe you don't need to work out so much, or like kind of an automatic assumption that my focus with working out was like about losing weight. So at one point she was telling me like, oh, like you know it's a myth that like people when they work out more lose weight because you know it does make you hungrier. I'm like, yeah, I know, but like I'm not really like I haven't even told you that I'm trying to lose weight because like that's not a part of my like thing right now. That's not why I'm talking to a nutritionist. I'm talking to a nutritionist because like I'm tired, right?
Right.
And so like it was just so frustrating because it was just like the immediate jumping to like you must be trying to lose weight, immediately jumping to like oh like because one of the things I was having was like feeling really tired the week of my period and like not being able to work out, and so like being like well you could just like also not work out during your period, and I'm like but like I'm at a point where I've realized I need to run to like sleep well, to do a lot of things. Like it is like I feel much better with running. And like obviously there's some balance there where like at some point my body is being like, hey, no, right now this is not, but like that's just like what I want to figure out. And like the
Right.
answer
Right.
was not right currently. Like I need to stop working out. Sorry, I'm
Yes.
so
You
rambling.
went to a professional to help you unpack that, and they just said, "Oh, well, you just like
Yeah.
don't work out."
Yeah. And
Yes.
so like that's like why I started like looking at like that's why I ended up reading that book Roar by Stacy Sims, I think. And like it's I don't know how like because like nutrition science is like so it's it's hard to navigate, and I
Yeah.
think for a lot of the reasons in this book she like lays out, and it's like a thing that I've like been learning to appreciate more, where like just like hormonally like so many things like just like it's not even just like within one body like or it's not just like even body to body like hormonally like things are different, but like also like over the course of a month bodies are different,
Right.
like just understanding that there's so much variability like kind of makes me automatically suspect of nutrition advice that's like given really broadly to women. And a lot of the point of that book to me, the Stacey Simmons, is that like you do have to make it very context dependent. So I don't know. I think it's just been really interesting to see the approaches that like someone who is focusing on women's physiology like kind of takes into account. But it's
Yeah.
also still frustrating because I think like she says in this book, like at the end of the day, there's just like not that much research. So you're kind of sitting there being like, I know that this isn't right, or like I know something's not right here. And then
Mhm.
just feeling like, but I don't know how to get the information that will
Uh-huh.
like help me. And that comes up in so many contexts in women's health because like we're so badly studied in general,
Yeah.
and it's just so irritating.
I mean, it's a theme of like every chapter in this book is the basic like every chapter goes through this cycle of here's another thing that women do not talk about and thus take like something is taken for granted as normal or whatever. There's like a baseline that people are accepting that they shouldn't, um
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there's no, because there is no conversation either, sort of community social level, or more importantly, the actual research level. There's no resources,
Hmm.
or as in your own like literal lived experience, right? Like when you go and seek out the resources, the people who are meant to be providing you with that support are also themselves operating in like an under-resourced
Right.
environment. So they also don't have the tools in order to in turn give you the tools. So like there's just a deficit all around. Like there's so many things here of just random myths. I was, like today years old, right? It was like reading this book where not today, it was like 2 days ago when I got to this part of the book, okay? Where she's is like dispelling the period myth. I literally was like, "Oh yeah, totally, that's just like a normal thing that happens if you work out really hard, you just like don't have your period
Hmm.
for a while." And she was
Yeah.
talking through this. I was like, "Wait, I'm sorry, what?" I have
Yeah.
not actually had that as an experience, so it's
Yeah.
not, I didn't have a I don't know, personal like health whatever.
Journey.
I can imagine the spiral that would have sent me into if I had.
Yeah.
But even so, like I got to that and I was like, yeah, that's just like a thing that happens. Like I didn't
Yeah.
question it, didn't think twice about it. Was just like, yep, that's just a totally normal thing that can happen to women. And if
Yeah, I could
that
swear, like,
is
I've had friends who, like, for them, that was, like, almost like a point of pride of, like, "Oh, like, this is the point I'm at in my training
my
where I'm,
training,
like,
it works. I just don't have
I
it.
don't have my period."
It's like, "No, that's bad. You should talk to a doctor." But also it doesn't actually matter if you talk to a doctor because the pervasiveness of that myth means you may well
Right.
talk to a doctor who's like, "Yep, totally
No
normal.
problem.
No
Yeah.
problem. Totally
Yeah.
cool. You're fine.
Yeah.
Nothing to investigate here."
Yeah.
That yeah, deeply, deeply again, the labiaplasty one is that was really, I just like
I know.
broke me, like
Yeah.
thinking about that, thinking about the fact that this is like it is common for
Yeah.
like elite women cyclists to have this surgery multiple times. I just
Yeah. Like, cause 'cause I've always only like, heard about labioplasty, like, in the context of, like, Real Housewives, like, plastic surgery where it, like, sounds very, like, vanity oriented. Like, I had never heard of it used in a context where it was like, "Oh, this is, like, addressing, like, something that, like, you need, like, that is, like, somehow about your, like, well-being." Like,
mhm,
that was yeah, it was
mhm.
wild.
These are you're talking about elite cyclists who, so these are people who have regular and like regular contact with medical infrastructure, like they're, like
Right.
they are seeing, they have doctors, they
Yeah.
have like specialized doctors that they are talking to constantly, and at the same time nobody is investigating whether or
Right.
why, like
Yeah.
that this should be cause for concern in any
Yeah,
way.
so for context, for those of you who haven't read the book, we keep talking about labioplasty and like how shocked we are. The context for this is that she's talking about these elite cyclists who are dealing with, I think it's like the saddle, right? Like where it's like not
Yes.
designed with like the genitalia in mind, really. And so basically, like, women are having to like sit in a particular way that is putting a lot of weight on their labia and like causing a lot of discomfort, because as she says, like, there's something about this phrasing that was very funny but also grim to me, that like the labia is not meant to bear weight. And I was
Yes.
like, oh yeah, yeah, I guess that is not the purpose of it.
Uh-huh.
um and so yeah, the other part of that discussion that was wild to me, but in a really fascinating way in multiple directions, were the experiments they were doing. So there's like a company that basically was wanted to develop a saddle that was like actually designed with like female genitalia in mind. And so like they were doing these experiments where women are cycling naked, I think on plastic seats, so that they can watch the fluid from the labia and see like how it like responds as they're cycling. And the thing that got me thinking about was just both like, I mean, like, I'm very grateful for these experiments to exist. I just cannot imagine being the person who has to set that experiment up, and I can't imagine being the person who's the subject of that experiment. And
Mhm.
it like one, but like at a deeper level, because this also came out. My favorite chapter of this was the sports bra chapter, which is about like how badly designed sports bras are, and like
Yeah.
one of the key parts of that is actually that like we don't really know the biomechanics of breasts. Like we know a lot about the biomechanics of muscles and how they move and stuff, but breasts are a soft tissue. We don't know like we kind of just assume they go up and down, but it turns out they go all sorts of
All
ways.
sorts of ways. Yep.
Yeah. They're like this, you know? Which I think if you have boobs, you kind of know that. Like, I
Yeah,
think you're like used
intuitively.
to the idea.
Sure.
But like
Yeah.
the idea of actually like understanding the physics of that is like a different level of a thing. And so they like were doing experiment, like it took like it was hard enough to get people to take it seriously as a science,
Mhm.
and also technologically like people like we just didn't have the tools to study it, but like or like to study it well and like the ways that would be able to garner results that are publishable.
Uh-huh.
But like they did do experiments basically tracking the movements of someone's boobs as they're running both with and without sports bras. And like I think like there's this deeper layer, and she sort of alludes to it, but that I found really interesting about the need for like trust in these kinds of experiments, because like that like feel, being followed naked biking to watch your labia, like that is like a very like
It's the next
intrusive
level. It's an
experience.
yes,
Yeah.
intrusive, like, research design. Yes,
Right.
yes.
And like so like what is the results like are like I this is gonna sound so pervy, and I swear I don't mean this in a pervy way, but like are there pictures? Because like there have been times when I've looked up stuff for work and I have fully seen a picture up someone's genitalia, and like
Yes.
that is just part of the case report. And I've always wondered what that process is like are like I hope that they are getting permission, like all of that stuff. um and this is like a context where I'm just so curious about just like human to human how you go about setting up that trust and how you go about presenting those results and documenting them and like keeping people's privacy and all of that.
Yeah, like, there are some big research design questions involved in all of this, which, I mean, is also part of, like, related to the bigger across the board themes of this book of,
Yeah.
how to study many of these things, and that you're dealing with stuff that is, like, there are so many layers to unpack about why women are understudied in,
Mhm.
across the board in terms of exercise science. And like one of there's just so many questions about how, yeah, how to engage with doing that research in the first place, and like getting people to have conversations about things, like related again, the the bike seat thing. I'm never,
Yeah.
it's gonna haunt me forever.
Yeah.
The additional context, if you did not read the book and you are just joining us to hear us discuss this, she like begins this by talking about how the saddle designs were like created were like thoughtfully constructed around male genitalia, that like there was an
Mhm.
actual like there's like was active research or like men being like this
Yeah.
is actually wildly uncomfortable,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
an earnest effort to be like we should like do something about that, and
Yeah.
concurrently you have female cyclists regularly getting reconstructive surgery,
Yeah.
and no like corresponding conversation, and I just and like the layers of the like twofold, like how is this a thing that just happens and nobody is doing anything about it, but then also related the ways in which um like shame would keep the athletes from having that conversation in the first place.
Yes.
Like that I it is not surprising to me that the conversation about the seats being uncomfortable for male genitalia being an easier and more open conversation.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's not
Yeah.
surprising to me that that's a thing that was being
Right.
discussed and people were like, "Oh, a lot of people are reporting this problem, we should do something about it," in a way that, like,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I appreciated the sort of the blending of, the ways in which a lot of these problems are also fundamentally sociological in nature,
Right.
like, and that's a huge piece of it. That was when we first picked up this book, I had this immediate anxiety because I was like, something like this has the potential to be really weird and bioessentialist. So I
Mhm.
appreciated like the introduction, the up top where I was like,
Yeah.
okay, thank you for speaking to my biggest concern about your book, in the introduction, because yes, that
Yeah.
was my
Yeah.
fear.
I was like so nervous about that going in because I feel like the conversation around women's sports these days like gets so frustrating with regards to like the protectionism and like how that leads to like excluding trans athletes off of like very faulty science, and she doesn't like she addresses it again at the end. She doesn't really go super into it. I think that's not as much the focus of the book, but
Yeah.
like I appreciated that she at least I think is like thinking about not just like what the science is and isn't, but also like what the narratives that we build based on that science represent and how they fit into like the bigger cultural context. Because I think like one of the sections I really appreciated was like when she was talking about how I think it's in the injury section, where she's talking about how like there's this idea that like women are more prone to like ACL injuries. And it's something like we've seen a lot like this year in the World Cup. A lot of like really big female soccer players weren't playing because of ACL injuries. And so, but at one point she talks about, and there are like physiological explanations for maybe why some of this could be the case, like
Mhm.
based on like how women's bodies are moving or something like that. But the other thing she really like wants to like emphasize is that like we can't rely entirely on biological explanations when there is also this greater social context where women are not being given the same conditions to train in that men are. And so
Mhm.
like if they're given, and this is like again at least in the context I've heard the women soccer players talk about this quite a bit, like they're not being given great training fields. There's a lot of things in their facilities. She also talks in this book about like how they're like the availability of like soccer shoes designed for women is just like not really there. So like there's
Yeah.
just like a number of things where it's like you can't just compare women to men and say, oh, women are more prone to this injury when there is this bigger issue then of like how are we also training them.
Right. Right. Yes. Yes. It's also like particularly frustrating too in the larger context of like, right now any discussion of women in sports is so fraught by like transphobia.
Mm-hmm.
And like also if these people are actually so fucking concerned about cis women
Yeah.
athletes, like they're the level of like you are missing, you have completely the wrong battle. You have picked
Yeah.
just a truly absurd battle in
Yeah.
your quest to protect women.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Not that I did not already know that, but I now feel like I'm like, oh, I have so much information about all the other battles that you actually reasonably could be picking instead
Right.
of choosing this
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely. It's just like, yeah, well, like, have you thought about the fields? Have you thought about the sports bras? All of those
The
feel
sports
like they could
bras,
do a lot more.
the healing time that women are given.
Yeah.
There's a bit where she's talking about also in the injury chapter about concussions and
Yeah.
how she talks about to go back to this point about like you cannot lean on biological explanations alone. There is evidence that women take longer to heal from concussions, but there is also evidence that women take longer to get treatment.
Mhm.
That women will complain about a concussion, and from the moment of their concussion to when they are being treated for it will be longer. And like
Yeah.
that's as with many injuries, right? If you continue to do nothing, if you continue to operate as normal on your injured body part with your injured body part, whatever, you will exacerbate the injury. And so,
Yeah.
like, how in order to get to the bottom of like is there something biological at play, like you actually can't even answer that question because you
Mhm.
first have to remove the really significant socially constructed barrier
Yeah.
the barrier too, but the significant socially constructed variable in order to answer the question of whether or not it's biological in nature, which is like a big that's a thing that she is wrestling with in every chapter of this book,
Yeah.
is that in all of the places where something crops up that has a there are pieces of this that have biological explanations, and that is clearly something that she is like that's a thing she's saying, is that there are biological differences and we need to be studying them. She's
Right.
also saying throughout that there are lots of socially constructed variables that make it really really hard to get to the
Yeah.
bottom of to like actually answer any of those biological questions. And again, if you really care so much about protecting women athletes, like start there. Like that's
Yeah.
that's actually
Yeah.
something that like that's like a good use of your time. But
Yeah. Yeah,
alas.
and it's interesting too because it like clearly cycles where like be like constructing a world where we're getting better science about women athletes theoretically to me should also like somehow feed into a world where we're also then like giving doctors better information, giving trainers better information so that that creates like the better social infrastructure. I can't do all of it, like science can't fix that, but like can
Right.
at least provide some like foundation for it to build on that like right now like it's just really 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 hard to do.
Right, right. That like there yes, if there's no again, the vicious cycle of it all. Like if the research isn't there, then how can doctors be giving people the correct information? But then also like how do you like know to do the research anyway? Yeah, the it's got a strong sort of chicken egg quality to it for
Yeah.
sure.
Totally. Um, I also the thing that was so I'm sorry, I'm so obsessed with the sports bras. I don't know why. I just like I think there's something about the combination of it being like an engineering problem, but like
Yeah.
also like a fashion problem. And also like it's so funny to think about the idea of sports bras as like this underserved market because like athleisure, and she talks about it too, like a little like athleisure has gotten so big. Like there was
Uh-huh.
always going to be this market and like people like just were not ready for it
Yes.
to become this market. But like,
Yes.
yeah, like sports bras have come a long way from
It's
like what
yes,
they
it's
used to
wild.
be.
It is a delightful, would recommend this book if only for
Yeah.
the explanation, the story of like the creation of essentially the first sports bra. It's was two jock straps sewn
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
Delightful,
Yeah.
incredible, incredible.
Yeah.
They're goofing around with the jock
Yeah.
strap, and they're like, okay, wait a minute. Okay, wait a minute, girl.
It works.
I think you are
Yeah.
on to something.
Yeah.
Uh
Yeah.
That's incredible. I love that so much. But also, like, it is to your point, it is so wild. Like, that's definitely something that is a trip to read. Not that far removed. Like, we are not that many years removed from this moment in time of like,
Right.
wow, to now be in this place where I don't know, before I stopped buying clothing, my number one place that I was buying clothing from was Athleta. Like I was an athleisure
Mhm.
girly through and through. Like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Lululemon
the
sports
move.
bras have
Right.
like I'm loyal to them. Like they just work and I hate that
Yes.
they're expensive, but they
But
work.
that right, like it's comfortable, okay?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it's so like, and then like the chapter after is also about like, I think that might be part of the the labiaplasty. I can't remember the shrink it and pink it. But also like, yeah, about like the lack of like good exercise clothing. And again, it's just wild to me because it's like athleisure became so big and
Yes.
like the market was just so there for comfortable clothing that you can also work out in. And like now it's like a whole thing. Like it's
Yes.
a whole thing. And it like if only for capitalism's sake, like
Right.
how did people not realize this
Yes,
before?
yes. How did the capitalism not drive you to make
Yeah.
this
I
choice?
mean, I guess it eventually did.
It eventually did, and that's she talks about the I think Title IX is the company that she mentions
Yeah.
in that the Shrink It and Pink It chapter, about how like there were manufacturers that connected the
Mhm.
dots before retailers did, and so there was
Yeah.
essentially one like female owned retailer that was like, I'm a buy all this stuff. I see the manufacturers are making it, and I also am looking around, and I'm like, yeah, I think we're onto something here, guys.
Yeah. So Mari said it is a what?
In response
I
to
hope
what?
yeah, I
I
hope it's the labiaplasty.
I hope it's yeah. I hope that you just joined us and just heard us say the word labiaplasty and missed, or maybe she's watching on
Yeah,
fast
so
forward.
like in 20 minutes we're gonna get the answer.
The answer to what she was asking that question about. Yeah, the labiaplasty, truly horrifying and wild that it is in fact in the chapter titled Shrink It and Pink It.
Yeah.
Truly a delightful marketing phrase because the point of that whole chapter, like the idea of Shrink It and Pink It. It's a standard approach was to take gear originally designed for men, make it smaller and add a capped sleeve or a nipped waist and offer it in a feminine color or a floral pattern, i.e. shrink it and pink it.
Mhm.
So strategy. And so in that chapter, we go from from this question of like sports bras and like how to design and like gear in general, and then that also segues us into like more practical like gear in addition to clothing. There's also the gear component of it, i.e. the saddles on bicycles. um
Yeah.
so the really but like that's a really broad range of like again to your point about why did the capitalism not help make this happen sooner, right? Like
Yeah.
really broad range of gear that is not like people were not recognizing the
Yeah.
need for distinct stuff. It's truly
And
wild.
like the willingness again, like I get my sports bras from Lululemon. Like there is a willingness from me and from many people clearly to spend like a decent amount of money
Yes.
on a thing if it works and it like
Yes.
lasts long. And so you're yeah, it's just like some of these companies she's talking about are companies that have been like Brooks was in here, like she's talking about also like the shoes, like
Yeah.
a big one was like basically there are all these companies that sell women's shoes. Are they actually designed in any way to reflect to the ways that women's feet tend to be different from men? No, not really, because there's actually different like what are they called? Was it hold last? There's like whatever like
Yeah.
mold or something is used to like I think it's the last. Like I think maybe that's like the heel or something. Oh, it's the jock straps. There we go. Yeah, yeah. I can't wait for this to become the TikTok hack.
Yeah.
You guys, ladies, we don't need a Lululemon.
You don't need to
anymore.
save money on your Lululemon bra. Just go to buy 2 jock straps and a simple straight stitch on your mom's sewing machine, and you too can have a cheap and functional sports bra. That actually seems like a really fun, just as like an experiment like that.
Yeah.
That seems like it would be delightful.
I
Anyway,
mean, Nicole, I think we know now what your next project's gonna be.
my next sewing project.
Yeah. If we ever did like you should do I mean, you should only do it because of this idea.
Okay.
You should do like a historical sewing thing where you like, I like, you know, like how
Yeah,
there are all
yeah.
these people who do like they're recreating old garments,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
like
That's not me.
your
That's
niche
not for
should be
me.
this,
Yeah,
like
this
whatever
is for
this
me.
is.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah. Most of the historical sewing girlies were sorry, this is a total tangent, but where they lose me is all of the hand sewing. Absolutely not.
mm.
I'm a modern woman.
Yeah.
I got those machines. I'm all
Yeah.
about those machines. In
Yep.
fact, even there is a fair amount of hand sewing that often still comes up in like contemporary pattern design, and it's always my least favorite step. I always groan.
Mm.
I have a project right now that I like set aside a month ago because I'm at a hand sewing step, and
Yep.
I was like, I don't want to. So
Yeah.
that's most of the like historical sewing is not for me, but we're like this. Yeah. Yeah. I'm all about this.
It's the 5-minute crafts.
5-minute crafts. Stop. Yes. Okay. Okay. All right. The vision is taking shape. I
Yep.
see it. I see.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
We have
Okay.
found your new use for this YouTube channel.
Yes. Yes. Anyway.
Deranged sportswear.
Yeah.
I don't even
Yeah.
remember anymore what we were talking about.
Where we were
Did
somewhere
you know
on
there were
this
sports
trinket and
corsets?
pinket.
People,
Sports
there were sports
corsets.
corsets.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
The corset stuff is like a again because of the historical sewing girlies. That's always something where I'm wary of how people talk about it. She had a couple
Yeah.
things like that where not even just
Mhm.
that, but where she alluded to something culturally where it's like that thing where I don't
You've
know.
seen
It's
it.
like she's got sort of an offhanded knowledge, and like the point isn't the corsets are not a great example of this, but
Right.
she says something late in the menopause chapter about the golden girls that is like so weird
Oh.
and dismissive that I was like, that is a
Huh.
wild way to describe the golden girls. And the point of the sentence is not the golden girls. The point of the
Yeah.
sentence is like older women being dismissed, and that's like
Yeah.
totally valid. But there is a way in which she is being dismissive of the golden girls in order to make the
Yeah.
example that was like annoyed me enough that I'm bringing it up now. There's like a few little instances of like that. It's a little bit like when we read the comedy book that I hated, that we both hated, that everybody hated. The way that woman talked about Lucille Ball, like the rage that I felt in my heart.
Yeah.
Only she kept talking about Lucille Ball, and so like I built the rage. This was a single offhanded comment about the Golden Girls, and she moved on, and so I could let it go. But
Yeah.
the cultural commentary in me was like, excuse me, what are you saying?
Yeah. Yeah, and it is funny because like we were just talking about like how we appreciated the cultural discussion like element of the book.
Yes.
But the pop cultural discussion.
Her
is a
pop
different
culture
thing.
references her pop cultural understanding needs work. That's all I'm saying. I have notes. I have
1
feedback.
star removed.
1 star removed for the way that she discusses pop culture. It's wrong. Source,
but the stars are
me.
back for the jock straps.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, she gets like automatic. There's like a guarantee, like a minimum 3 stars for the book for the jockstrap story alone. Like there's like a cannot be removed, like automatic clearance for the jockstraps.
Yeah, I will say like I don't have a lot to say about it, but I did really appreciate the menopause chapter overall. Because again, I think while I am on my own weird like reproductive health journey and like trying to better understand why the science around like women's health is so bad, like menopause comes up and you're kind of like, oh, like there's actually a few books coming out soon, I think, from science writers. Like I've seen them like listed places that are about like menopause, and like it's super fascinating to like, because I feel like now menopause is starting to have a moment, like maybe because of the internet and like being better about sharing information, like all of this stuff. Hopefully like it makes it so that by the time we are dealing with menopause, like that's what I want. I just want it so that by the time I have to go through it, like it makes more sense. Because like hearing the way she, like one of the athletes she's talking about is basically having all these like premenopausal symptoms, but like has no idea what's going on. And I can like understand sort of like how destabilizing that must be, especially if it's something that's like going on long term. Like I've definitely seen when I change like my own little science experiments on myself are like changing the level, like based on my doctors, obviously. But like when I change the level of like my hormone medication, I'm like, holy shit, this works. Like this, the hormones do things. Who would have thought?
Wow.
Like even if you just like add a few milligrams like a day, like oh shit, that like makes a difference. And like, but like there's for me like the way that it changes, like there's like an immediate change and there's a long-term change, and like dealing with the immediate changes would be a lot harder if they stayed that way for a long time. And so when I read these stories where it's like you're starting to like experience these changes but you don't know why, like, and I don't think you're thinking like, oh, I'm going to be going through menopause soon, especially because like you might not have lost your period yet, like there's like that seems like the obvious signal, but like you might not have that,
you have symptoms long before. Right.
And then I can just imagine that, like she talks about the athletes in the book who she's interviewing. They're saying like, I just went to a doctor, and they're just like, well, like, yeah, like it's sort of just like shrug emoji.
Yes.
Which is like a common reaction that I feel like women get when they like go for various health issues, and like it's weird that like menopause feels like it's something that should somehow be more obvious, or like a way, like something that like we should be able to know is coming, and it's not.
Yeah. I mean, yes, but it is related to some, like, you know, something we've kind of been circling around, but it reminds me of the A View from Somewhere. The idea of like there's a way in which she talks about this really early on in the book, that like the let me find it. I was just looking at it. It comes up a bunch, but women couldn't speak objectively about women's issues or their own sex, like that. This idea, but like men weren't asking these questions either, right? So like if you're not allowed to speak about this because it is too personal to you, and the people to whom it is not personal do not give a shit, then who is going to talk about it? Like who is going to take
and also like the premise is so weird, because it's like, well, like if men were doing all the science and they were doing all the science on men, like what was their objectivity? Like why was that not called into question at all? Like that was like a thing I was thinking about early on in this book too, like the feeling, this is gonna be super broad, like this is not like a hard, like there's so many holes in what I'm about to say, but I feel like the thing that I kept thinking about was like this idea that like you hear all the time, like growing up, that like you're not going to be as fast as the guys, you're not going to be as good as the guys. And when she's talking about how all of this exercise science and like all of the data we have about how to do training and nutrition and everything is built on data around men, and you're just like, oh, like it feels like a little bit like you're being set up for failure then. Like you're just being set up to try to prove yourself to people, like in a contest that's like not really fair.
Yes, right. If the game is so rigged against you in the first place, because we're saying, okay, here's what the expectation is, and also the only advice we can give you is on something that is like, we can't actually give you relevant advice either. In addition to saying that here's like the expectation, and we are going to essentially ensure that you live down to that expectation by virtue of not giving you any sort of tailored advice or suggestions, or like, I don't know, the number of times every chapter seems to have this cycle of like, you know, we made a really obvious thing where we acknowledged that the athlete was a woman and did some change, and then they won, and then she was a winner. It's like a recurring over and over and over again. The thing about the U.S. Women's national team, like the cycle tracking, and
so
like
fascinating.
Modifying that, like it's like a really, I mean, for all of the stuff that they are tracking, all of the sort of, you know, biometric data collection that is inevitably part of being an elite athlete at that level. Wild to me that it is a relatively new thing to be like, yeah, we should also keep tabs on your menstrual cycle. Like, Yeah. That makes sense. That makes a ton of sense. I don't know why we weren't. You weren't doing that.
Yeah.
Oh,
You
okay.
just didn't know.
Okay, you shouldn't think that was a relevant biological factor. You're like in all of the information, all of the stuff that you were tracking about these women and their health. That one didn't seem significant to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's also weird because like I feel like, I mean, obviously I'm not like at that level of athlete, but like I never thought about it either.
Yeah.
Right? Like I just didn't think about it. Like I never really thought about my period until I started trying to get pregnant. Otherwise it was just like a thing that you deal with, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's just like a time of the month. And like so it wasn't until like I had to know other parts of my cycle where I was like, oh, okay, now I sort of appreciate again that the hormones are a thing. It turns out there's something going on.
Something's
like,
happening. I get it. Yeah.
It's all connected.
Yes.
And like it taught me a lot about myself, but I never like I still didn't like think to connect it to like, oh, like well, like how do I feel when I work out? Like I just never really thought about it until like I was having times where it was like, oh, I'm tired right now.
Yeah.
And like maybe I need to like eat some more iron, something. Like I don't know, like that kind of thing. Where like, oh.
Okay, but in this example, we are talking about people whose not just the athletes themselves, but the teams surrounding these athletes, right? Are teams of people who are designed to calibrate biological machines. Like that is what team doctors like that's what's going on there. Like that is like the doctors, the coaches, the like broad infrastructure that exists around elite athletes. That like that is what their job is to calibrate biological machines. And the fact that it took so long for any of them to be like, this is a data point that we could consider. IDK. Baffling.
It really is. It really is.
Anyway.
That's like the thing about this book is like I feel like a lot of the things feel like they should be so obvious.
Yes.
And then you're like, oh, but it's not. And then also like again, like the weird ways where it trickles down, like you said, like I am not a biological machine being trained by like doctors who are keeping track of every biological detail, but like the things still trickle down because like what elite athletes do in their training sort of is sort of like the highest level of like kind of what everyone else learns to do if you like want to work out a lot, if you like treat fitness as like a hobby kind of pursuit sort of thing. Like I'm not training like to be an athlete like them, but like I am like reading about how to do my runs better, how to eat better, like all that kind of stuff. Like it's still gonna like make its way into that discourse. And so if that's just like not a part of even the most elite people's conversations, like why would we? Like, why would we do that?
It's the Devil Wears Prada scene, but for fitness.
Right.
You think this doesn't concern you? But for health. There's
the loose sweater of periods.
Yes, correct. The blue sweater of the fitness world is periods. But they're the interconnectedness of things though, right? Like the way in which the sort of like one thing feeds into another. I will say there is something just incredibly impressive about the overall project of this book for that reason, like because there are so many different things happening together, and like she's just doing her best to separate and disentangle I'm looking at it now. The Shrink It and Pink It is not the same as the Jockstrap. Bounce Control. Boobs get a whole chapter. Boobs, Shrink It and Pink It was separate. Bounce Control is the boob chapter. Rightly so.
It's a great title.
It's a great title. Incredible title. And to Mari's point, actually, this is 100% where I'm going, that not thinking about our cycles through feels like socialized as well, though, which so this is where I was going with this, that like that is like all of these things are feeding into each other in this way. In the Bounce Control chapter, she talks about how like the emergence of the sports bra 5 years after the passage of Title IX, there's a way in which all of these things do sort of like feed, like
totally.
what the capitalists are doing over here, and then like what Congress is doing over here, and but all of those things, it is easy to feel like they are isolated when in fact they are not. Like all of these
Yeah.
things are feeding into one another in really significant ways. That I don't know, you like you have to take in the whole picture in order to understand how to fix it, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think sort of like related to Mari's point, and like, we're not thinking about our cycles. I think it's also because like we're not like talking about it. It's not like I've
Yes.
ever been in a locker room and been like, oh, I'm on my period. Who's on their period too? Like that kind of thing. Like, I think like you don't, like, it's just like not a part of conversation really.
Yes.
And like
Yes.
that, I think that goes for like sports bras and stuff too. Like I think over time it's changed, and like now that there are also more options, there's just like more ways to actually talk about it. And so
Mhm.
I think it's changing, but it's like the other thing that like it kind of made me think of is like this sort of trope that comes up a lot when we talk about women's health, which is the idea that like women will also just like put up with a lot of shit.
Mhm.
Um, partly because they like have to, like if you keep going to the doctor to tell them that you're having a lot of pain, and they're just like, well, periods are painful, and then
Yep,
like
suck it up.
years later you find out that actually you have endometriosis or something like that. Like that is a common story. Like it takes women a lot of time to get a lot of really like tough medical conditions diagnosed, and it's
Mhm.
because their pain, their discomfort is often ignored and just treated as something that's like a part of being a woman. And it's like, I don't know, it's just like so it's so irritating. It's so like I
Yes.
get so irritated thinking about it, because ugh, like when I think about these statistics about like certain diseases and all of these things, like and how they appear in various contexts, it's like how much of that statistic is really like we treat it as just like, oh, a percentage of the population has this, but like how much of it is just like because we're not addressing it, like we're not like addressing it early enough to be able to give adequate quick care. We're not addressing it in our science to be able to like think about how do we give people diagnosis, how do we give doctors the tool to give these diagnoses. Like I just it's
Yeah.
so it's so annoying.
The combined factors of like socialization, people not talking about stuff, and also doctors like essentially telling you to suck it up, is the crux of what was happening in the stories that I cannot let go of. But the labiaplasty,
Yeah, yeah.
that's a big
Right.
part of what was happening. It
Yeah.
is both of those things, which again, like the saddle seats, just there is infinitely more comfort around, or it's like social comfort around discussing issues of male genitalia than of like, right, so like there's the layers there, um and then in additionally the like, oh yeah, well, riding a bike is just it's just uncomfortable, so I don't know what to tell you. It's
Yeah.
fine, you're fine.
Yeah.
Just go get your little surgery, your fucking
Yeah.
plastic surgery that sorry, I can't.
Yeah.
uh
Yeah. I mean, it's so trite because this is like obviously not universally true, but you're just kind of like, man, like what if men had to live the way that women do? Like I like and again, I mean that super broadly. Like,
Yes.
like this is not like I feel really bad speaking generally about like stuff that like is medical, and like in general, like my health's pretty okay, so I don't want to just be like super dismissive in that sense. But yeah,
Yes.
there's just stuff like that where you're like, good lord, you guys created like this entire field of science built on men, done by men, and
Yes.
then like we're surprised like that it didn't apply to women, but like then didn't care.
Yeah.
Like just we're like,
Yeah.
okay,
Cool.
our solution is just to be like, well, it's just gonna suck for you guys a little bit more.
Okay. Thanks. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And like Mari's saying, like the thing I'm
Yes.
complaining about is like so much worse. Like especially for Black women, like we were talking about Under the Skin by Linda Villarosa, which is a great book I read for the BookTube Prize, about inequities and racial inequities in healthcare in America. In it's aggravating too in a lot of the same ways, more so because like there are like dire like deadly outcomes in the context of what she's talking about. But like one of the things that comes up in her book is like her trying to talk to doctors and just like explain like the ways that racism is present in medicine, and then just being like, no, it's not a problem. Like it's just not a problem. You can't call doctors racist, like that kind of thing. And you're just like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think we can.
Like,
Like,
I
I
think I
feel.
think I can. I think I just did.
Yeah. Yeah, like super anecdotally, like a thing that I've become so increasingly curious about, and it's like something I've wanted to ask other science writers about, is like whether like I for a time when I was dealing with a lot of my health stuff was not telling doctors that I'm a science writer because my theory had been that if I don't tell them, they'll actually take time to explain stuff to me. That turned out
Interesting.
to not be the case. It was actually when I felt like this is not a well-controlled experiment, but it was like when I finally told doctors that I'm a science writer that I felt like they wanted to take the time to explain things to me
Uh-huh.
because they were like, "Oh, she'll understand it."
You'll
And
understand me, as opposed to otherwise they're like, she's not going to get it, so I don't need to explain anything to her. Yeah, yeah.
exactly. And I've like talked to like a handful of other people who've sort of had that experience, and it's so bad. It's so
Yeah.
bad. It's frustrating on a human level to me as like a communicator, someone like who thinks about how to communicate science.
Yeah.
Like you're just like, well, like this is this should be part of your job. And I get that there are other forces that like make medicine really hard to practice in the US and like that limit the amount of time that doctors can give to patients that make it really rushed. But like, I don't know, it's just really bothersome the poor level of care and then like the small little things you have to do to try to get a certain attention and then knowing that the doctors are still like no it's not a problem. We're not racist. Like
Yeah. Like,
we
you
don't have
demonstrably
problems.
are, though. Like, you
Yeah,
demonstrably are. So I don't you can stick your head in the sand all you want, but like, this is definitionally
yeah,
false. Under the Skin. We were talking about Under the Skin because I had suggested it I had like sent Toboki a list of potential books. And Toboki was like, "Oh yeah, I read that for the BookTube prize," and I was like, "You know what? That is almost certainly why I bought the book."
yeah,
Like, what definitely happened is I bought the book after you talked about it, and then it has sat on my shelf for however many months since that happened, and then I
yeah,
was like, "Oh, here you want to read this
yeah.
book."
It's a
So
great book. I do highly recommend it to people. I think it's like it's like a pretty fast read. Like it's not a super thick book. It's actually kind of like I feel like similarly structured to this one in that it's like very like you can definitely kind of read each chapter on its own and sort of like engage with that one and then like pick it up, put it down, and go like instead of feeling sort of compelled to like read it all at once.
uh-huh.
So I definitely do recommend it. Because I feel like, yeah, medicine in the US is really fucked.
In conclusion, hot take.
Yeah. I don't like healthcare here.
Did you know?
Yeah.
Healthcare in the
When I was
US
in Norway, I
close.
got a vaccine and I got a refund for my vaccine when they realized that they had like didn't have to charge me and like because I'm not in the state system, right? So they were like, okay, so we're gonna charge you for this vaccine. I'm like, great. I get a call from them later. They're like, oh, we weren't supposed to charge you. We're gonna refund you. I'm like, I've literally never gotten a refund for medical care. Like, what the fuck? Uh,
What is
what's going
this?
on?
What is this elite care and
Yeah,
respect and deference I'm being shown?
yeah.
Womp womp.
I know a lot of other medical experiences I'd like refunds on. Can I get those
Right. Yeah,
taken
yeah,
care of?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, did you have anything else with this book that we didn't get to?
You know, I'm sure I had so many thoughts and feelings about this book. Um
I am curious because
Generally,
you run a lot.
mhm,
Um, did
sure.
it like reflect on your experience with running in any way?
Um, I mean, I have so little interest in like I don't know, like I don't
Mhm.
that actually one of the things that was interesting is when she was talking about the sort of motivation
Yeah.
elements and like the intrinsic extrinsic motivation bit. She kind of was like briefly touched on this, but when she was talking
Mhm.
about distance like distance runners and stuff,
Mhm.
um I thought that was sort of interesting. That's actually a way in which it sort of loosely felt like you could make a case for like an adverse sociological consequence of like patriarchy basically for little boys, that like there's a way
Mm.
in which um women and girls are essentially forced to acquire intrinsic motivation in a way that boys are not. Like, I don't know, it's
Mhm.
just like sort of a thought that I had. This is not like just from the way that she was talking about
Yeah.
intrinsic motivation and in female endurance athletes that I thought was sort of interesting. This is a very half-baked thought.
Yeah, yeah.
No.
The idea was like they're like in general, the research suggests that like men are more motivated by competition and women
Yes.
are more motivated to kind of just see how far they can go or
Yeah.
like
And
seeing like what.
specifically that like in like ultra marathons and stuff that men are more likely to drop out basically. Like that
Mhm,
like
yeah.
that you'll like if you get,
Yeah, there
and
was
she
one
she
weird thing
specifically talks about
science.
a woman who dropped out who like was running an ultra was going she was doing 100 miler and dropped out after 60 miles. That is insane to me. But
Mhm.
there's like the separate
Yeah.
piece of it. But like that phenomenon specifically, while the example was of a woman doing this, it is more common for men to do that. And it is
Mhm.
related to that thing of just like basically being like, well, I'm clearly not gonna like win. I'm not gonna achieve whatever
Right.
the extrinsic thing was that is like driving me to do this. Um
Yeah.
that was the implication. I don't know. Now I'm like maybe I may be
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
misquoting and misrepresenting this now, but
No. Yeah, no, I thought that was because there was like one weird thing science wise that like I felt weird about, where she was talking about how they found that men tend to have a less even pace through a race compared to women. Like women are
Hmm.
more likely to maintain a steady pace.
Mm.
And that was kind of confusing to me because I wouldn't necessarily like associate that with any kind of like sociological
Yeah.
thing where like I would just kind of assume that you have a different race strategy.
Yeah.
Like I don't know that I don't know that much about pacing for races, but like it just doesn't seem that weird for someone to have an uneven pacing
No.
strategy, given like that that's a thing for
Yes.
races.
Yes.
So that was like one detail science wise where I was like, I don't know that this like
Uh,
the way that this is framed in the book makes sense. But
I'm confused by what exactly you're even saying here, and whether or
yeah,
not your data points say the thing that you think it says,
right.
is
Yeah.
like confusing to me here. Yeah.
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 Yeah. I don't know. I have nothing material to add on behalf of marathon runners other than it's like, yep. Uh, uh
Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah.
I enjoyed this
Um
book though.
yeah. Yeah, I really enjoyed it too. So I hope everyone else did. If anyone else has any opinions or questions or anything they want to add, now's the time to tell us them.
Mhm.
And also all the times before this,
Yeah.
were also times that you could have told us.
Sure.
But
You can
here's
actually at any time. The time is now and also later and also it's
yeah,
always. The time is always actually.
yeah. But yeah, I really like. I mean, like I said, in a number of ways, I feel like for me, this book like hit on a lot of things I've been thinking about.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for picking it.
Thanks. Good job,
Um
May.
Good job. So we are not meeting again in November, and then December we're doing a little bit late. We're not meeting again until December 16th, so we're taking a little bit of a break. And so I've chosen to give us a big
A chunk book.
chunk book in that time. It has an audiobook. It has an audiobook though, so just to be clear, that the important distinction would never again will I try to suggest a chonky book without an audiobook. I've learned
Mhm.
my lesson. All such books must be donated, discarded. I don't know. I'm never reading them. Anyway, but yeah, so our next book is Set the Night on Fire, LA in the 60s on December 16th. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was super interesting too. um, Super cool to see that like the topics in the book are like related to things that like people see.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I assume like I mean like again the ACL stuff I feel like is stuff I've seen in the news, and so like hearing it kind of fleshed out more in this book was super interesting.
And like
So
contextualized in the way that she did here.
totally.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, Colby. Um, yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. So
Great.
That's our next book. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you guys on December 16th.
Bye.